Hey everyone. Week 3 in this class is going to introduce you to scholarship that is looking at how we can make assessment more equitable for students from different backgrounds. You'll read a selection from Masao Inoue's book about labor-based grade contracts. In the supplemental resources for this week, I've also included some appendices from that book so you can take a look at actual grade contracts and how they've been used. I've also included in the supplemental resources Masao Inoue's address to the 2019 Conference on College Composition and Communication, the 4Cs. That conference is one of the marquee events in our discipline. It's where folks kind of come together to share scholarship from a number of different subfields. And I remember that conference, it was in Pittsburgh that year. There was a lot of squirming in chairs because what Inoue did during that address back in 2019 is that he spoke to other scholars of color to talk about how the field was not very welcoming. And that got folks a little, it was a little controversial at the time, and there's a lot of squirming in chairs. But I think it kind of underscores some of the key tensions, some of that, that squirming underscores key tensions that we still have in the field. Our discipline, and a lot of sub-disciplines within writing studies, they are predominantly white. So it was controversial, but I think also telling a little bit to the reaction to his address. But you can read that in the supplemental resources. Historically, when scholars in composition studies and writing assessment, when they talk about students, they used to talk about them as kind of monolithic, usually male, usually white, but that has really changed over the last 30, 40 years. Women make up a far larger share of college classrooms, and colleges and universities, like our society as a whole, are much more diverse than they used to be. What the readings, particularly Inoue's reading, Arnetha Ball's reading, that you're not required to read this week, but it'll be, it's in your textbook, and I note it in the supplemental resources. What those texts are really asking are the methods we use to assess student writing sensitive to these changing landscapes that we have in higher education? Inoue is specifically asking, are the standards we use to assess student writing impacted by racial and cultural biases? I think that's really what he's getting at. And I think he's saying yes, that they are. And what can we do about it? Inoue's work, the work of several other scholars in writing assessment, argue that standards are impacted by racial biases that we bring to the classroom, often unconsciously. It's not like we're trying to do it, but sometimes we grow up in contexts that value a particular kind of communicating, and we bring that to bear on how we evaluate student writing. I'm also asking you to read a conference presentation that I gave at the 2017 Conference on College Composition and Communication. We call it the Cs. So the 2017 Cs, which was in Portland that year, I was working through how we do anti-racist writing assessment work at institutions that are overwhelmingly white. What does that anti-racist writing assessment look like in an Appalachian school where my classrooms are 85 to 90% white? Still kind of wrestling with that question. You can see how, where my answer was at that time back in 2017. I'm asking you to read that because I want you to see that there's a variety of different ways that, that we can take a look at this idea of difference. We can take a look at it from the lens of gender, talk about it in a second, the lens of race, but also whiteness studies. There's a lot of different ways that we can take a look at this equity work in the discipline, and a lot of the discipline is about doing that kind of work, again, because college classrooms are so much more diverse than they used to be. I also want you to read that because I want to demystify a little bit giving conference presentations. This is something that y'all can do. If I can do it, trust me, you can do it. The call for presentations, for proposals to present, they're usually due in late April or May for the following year. And the year that I gave this was after the 2016 election, and I referenced that a little bit in my presentation. I'm also asking you to read Haswell and Haswell's article about gender bias, and I'm also asking you to read an article in the Journal of Writing Assessment about neurodiversity and its intersectionality and neurodiversity. The field of writing studies has thought about gender and communication in the past, but there's been a lot less conversation about how gender impacts our assessment of student writing. The Haswell and Haswell article is probably the most important article in that kind of conversation. Neurodiversity is a newer concern of the field, and I'm really interested to see what you all will think of that reading that I'm assigning this week. Finally, I'm going to ask you to find your own article about a student population group, about equity, about a question that might be related to equity and writing assessment that might relate to your context. There's a video that you can take a look at that gives you pointers about how you can find articles in the field of writing assessment. And there's a number of different sources that you can take a look at. If you're stuck there, reach out. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. If you are really stuck, you can just read Arnetha Ball's article that's in Assessing Writing, our one of our 2 main textbooks for the class. I want to be really clear with all these readings. We're just scratching the surface, and I feel a little queasy about kind of this like cafeteria style of diversity that we're doing this week. Like, here's a dollop of anti-racist work. Here's a dollop of Appalachian studies and how it might apply to the discipline. Here's another dollop of gender. But it is what it is. You could teach a whole class about how the field of writing assessment has tried to address this issue of equity and diversity. I chose articles that I thought were pretty accessible, that also kind of gave you an introduction to a variety of different ways that folks have addressed these kinds of questions. And again, we could read about this all semester long. From here, our readings are going to get much more practical. We're going to get into like how you specifically do assessment and different forms of assessment, and that's where I'm really kind of interested to see, particularly those of you that have experience teaching, to see what's new to you all and see maybe how you've implemented some of these things and what things you might implement in the classes that you teach. So looking forward to our conversation this week, and I'll talk to you all soon.